Put your hands where I can see them, boy. Don't move, or I swear I'll put you on the ground. Those words, sharp as a knife, tore through the quiet Atlanta evening. 16-year-old Alex Thompson froze, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it over the echo of the officer's voice. He had just finished basketball practice, still wearing his Westlake High jacket, his gym bag slung over one shoulder, but none of that mattered in that moment. Under the glow of a Buckhead streetlight, he wasn't a student, or an athlete, or a son. He was a target. Before we go further, where are you watching from? Subscribe and like if you believe justice should never depend on skin color. Now, let's get into this story. The night began like any other. Alex walked home from practice, earbuds in, listening to a podcast about black excellence and social justice. It was something his mother used to talk about before she passed away from cancer 6 years ago. A woman who taught him strength, kindness, and grace under fire. The streets of Buckhead were calm, the kind of quiet only wealth could buy. Brick homes lined the sidewalks, manicured lawns glistened under the streetlights, and luxury cars purred into gated driveways. To anyone else, it was a peaceful evening. To Alex, it was familiar, but not always comfortable. He knew what his father had taught him about these streets. Son, even when you belong somewhere, there will be people who'll make you feel like you don't. His father, James Thompson, wasn't just any man. He was the Attorney General of Georgia, a man who had fought in courtrooms and on the streets for civil rights since his 20s. But to Alex, he was simply Dad, the man who still tucked a note into his lunch every morning that said, "Be kind, be strong." That's the man Alex tried to live up to that night. As he turned down Peachtree Avenue toward home, Alex noticed a black and white police cruiser creeping behind him. He ignored it at first, telling himself it was nothing, but the hum of the engine stayed close, too close. Then came the blinding flash of headlights. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" a voice barked. 2 officers stepped out. Officer Hayes, tall, white, mid-40s, with the cold confidence of a man used to being obeyed, and Officer Ramirez, Latino, younger, quieter, his expression unreadable. "Where you headed, son?" Hayes demanded, shining his flashlight in Alex's face. "Home, sir," Alex replied, steady but polite. "Just finished practice." "Practice? Around here?" Hayes smirked, glancing at Ramirez. "You look a little out of place for this neighborhood." Alex swallowed, keeping his hands visible. "I live here, 456 Peachtree Avenue, right up the street." Hayes circled him like a hawk. "That so? Mind showing some ID?" Alex reached slowly into his pocket, his voice calm. "Yes, sir, it's right here." But before he could hand it over, Hayes grabbed his wrist. "What's that in your bag? You carrying something you shouldn't?" "Just gym clothes," Alex said, trying to stay composed. Ramirez shifted uneasily. "Hayes, he's just a kid." "Shut it, Ramirez," Hayes snapped. "You know what these types pull around here. Seen it 100 times. They act innocent until you're the one bleeding." Alex froze at those words. These types. His stomach twisted. He'd heard them before, just never directed at him. He lifted his chin slightly. "Sir, with respect, I haven't done anything wrong." Hayes's jaw tightened. "Oh, you got a smart mouth too? You think you can talk your way out of this?" He shoved Alex's bag to the ground, clothes spilling onto the pavement. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want. But tonight, you're coming with us." Alex hesitated. His father's number was on speed dial. His hands trembled as he lifted his phone, trying to stay calm. Hayes lunged, knocking it out of his hand. "You trying to film me, boy?" "No, sir. I was just calling my dad." "I said hands up," Hayes barked again, pulling his baton free. Ramirez took a step back, conflicted. He'd seen Hayes lose control before, but this time it felt worse. The boy's fear was raw, undeserved. "Victor," Hayes hissed, You with me or not? Ramirez hesitated. He's just a kid. Man, let's just... You want to end up like your father? Hesitate, and I'll write you up for insubordination. That shut him up. Ramirez stepped closer, placing a hand on Alex's shoulder. Son, just do what he says. Alex's eyes filled with tears. Not from fear, but disbelief. I didn't do anything, he whispered. Hayes shoved him against the cruiser. We'll see about that. But what Hayes didn't know, what neither officer realized, was that when Alex tried to call his dad, he had also activated his hidden recording app, the phone. Lying on the pavement, was still capturing every word, every insult, every breath of injustice that hung in the air. You people think you can walk through our neighborhoods, huh? Hayes muttered. Not on my watch. Our neighborhoods? Alex repeated softly, his voice breaking. My father. I don't care who your daddy is. Hayes cut him off. You're going downtown. The cuffs clicked around Alex's wrists, cold and final. Ramirez looked away as they drove off. The boy's phone still glowed faintly on the street corner, the recording app silently documenting the truth. Back at home, James Thompson was setting the table, expecting Alex in 10 minutes. He glanced at the clock, smiled, and turned on the news. Another report about police misconduct flashing across the screen. He sighed, shaking his head. Not again, he muttered. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. When he answered, a voice said coldly, Your son's been detained. James froze, his blood turning to ice. Detained? For what? Suspicion of trespassing and resisting arrest. The words barely made sense. That's impossible, he said. He's 16. He's my... But the line went dead, in the silence that followed. James heard his own heartbeat and the echoes of his past. The shouts in Selma, the pain of a baton across his back, the tears of a younger version of himself vowing that his child would never face the same hatred. But here it was again, history repeating itself, under the same sky, in the same America. He grabbed his keys and rushed out the door. Meanwhile, in the back of the cruiser, Alex stared through the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold. His wrists hurt, his lip bled, but his spirit, though shaken, was unbroken. He whispered to himself the words his mother once told him, the words that would carry him through what was coming next. Even in the dark, Alex, you hold your light. The story of that light, how it burned through corruption, through pain, through fear, was only beginning. The metal door slammed shut behind Alex with a heavy, hollow sound that echoed through the narrow hallway of the Midtown Atlanta precinct. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, humming like an old memory of every injustice that had ever walked those halls. His wrists throbbed where the cuffs had bitten into his skin, and his breath came shallow, not from fear alone, but from disbelief. He had done everything right. He had complied, spoken respectfully, stayed calm. Yet here he was, sitting on a cold steel bench, bruised and handcuffed, accused of crimes he didn't commit, across the room. Officer Hayes stood with his arms crossed, smirking, while Ramirez leaned against the wall, his expression tense, eyes distant. The air smelled of old coffee and sweat, a mix of exhaustion and authority. Hayes finally spoke, his tone dripping with mockery. So, genius, you still want to tell us you live in Buckhead? What did you do? Mow lawns there? Alex stared at the floor, lips trembling. I told you the truth, he whispered. Hayes slammed his fist on the table. Look at me when I'm talking to you. The sound jolted Alex upright. That's better. Now, why don't you tell me what you were really doing snooping around those houses? I wasn't snooping, Alex said, his voice small but steady. I was walking home from practice. Practice? Hayes sneered. What kind of practice you need in the dark? You selling something? Ramirez shifted, uncomfortable. Vic, come on, the kid's just scared. Scared? Of what? His own guilt? Hayes shot back. He paced like a lion in a cage, each step echoing on the tile floor. You think I don't know your type? Always got an excuse, always the innocent one, until someone ends up robbed or dead? Ramirez rubbed his temples. Maybe we should call his parents. He said his dad's a lawyer or something. Hayes laughed bitterly. Yeah, right. His daddy's probably in county lockup. Same as him, but even as he said it, his words trembled slightly, as if daring the world to prove him wrong. The irony, of course, was that Alex's father was already on his way, furious, determined, and carrying the weight of both the law and history on his shoulders. Meanwhile, back in the holding area, Ramirez hesitated near the evidence table. He looked at the body cam mounted on his chest, still blinking red. You gonna delete that? Hayes asked sharply. Ramirez didn't answer. You heard me. Wipe it. We both know how these things go. The department won't back us if it looks like we roughed up some honor student. That's not what happened, Ramirez muttered. Oh, really? You think anyone's gonna believe he didn't mouth off? You saw how he looked at me, like he was better than us. Hayes moved closer, his voice low and venomous. Delete it, or I swear I'll make sure you're walking the streets instead of driving them. Ramirez exhaled heavily, hands trembling. He opened the data terminal and plugged in the drive. But what Hayes didn't know was that body cam footage uploaded automatically to the precinct's cloud server. No deletion could stop that. The truth was already safe, somewhere above their reach. Minutes later, Hayes returned to the holding cell with a small clear bag in his hand. Inside it was a few grams of marijuana. Well, he said with a cold smile. Look what we found in your backpack. Alex blinked, confused. That's not mine. Sure it isn't, Hayes replied, setting the bag down on the table. Just magically appeared, huh? You kids think you're clever, but you're not the first liar I've met. Please, Alex said, voice cracking. You're making a mistake. Ramirez stared at the bag, his conscience tearing at him. Hayes, he said quietly. We didn't. Not a word. Hayes snapped. You want to keep your badge? Then you didn't see anything. Ramirez turned away, guilt heavy in his chest. He thought of his father, a police officer killed in the line of duty 15 years earlier. His father had taught him that the badge meant something sacred. But tonight, under Hayes's command, it felt poisoned in another room. Sergeant Michael Evans sat at his desk, typing up shift reports. A routine check on the new detainee's name stopped him cold. He looked closer at the screen. Alex Thompson, address, 456 Peachtree Avenue. His brow furrowed. That address was in Buckhead, and the emergency contact listed was James Thompson, Attorney General of Georgia. Evans's pulse quickened. He grabbed the phone and called the front desk. Bring me the intake form for Thompson, now. Within minutes, he had it in hand. He scanned it, verifying every line. His gut told him this was bad, very bad. Evans stood, adjusted his belt, and walked toward the interrogation room when he opened the door. The scene spoke for itself. Hayes was leaning over the table, his voice rising. Alex sat still, eyes red but unbroken. Officers, Evans said firmly. That'll be enough. Hayes turned, irritated. Excuse me? You heard me, Evans said. Step outside. Ramirez immediately obeyed, relief flickering in his eyes. Hayes hesitated, but Evans's tone carried authority. Now, Officer Hayes. The door closed behind them. Evans crouched beside Alex. Son, what's your full name? Alex Thompson. And your father? James Thompson. Evans nodded slowly. I thought so. He stood, his tone serious. Sit tight. I'm going to make a call. 10 minutes later, the precinct's front doors burst open. James Thompson walked in wearing his dark suit. Tie loosened from the drive, fury and disbelief in his eyes. "Where is my son?" he demanded. The officer at the desk stammered. "Sir, he's in holding. Get him out, now." The station went silent. Hayes appeared from the hallway, his arrogance fading as recognition dawned. "Wait, Thompson? As in the Attorney General of Georgia," James said coldly. "And you have about 10 seconds to explain why my son is in handcuffs for walking home." Ramirez looked down. Hayes stammered. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding. He resisted." "Resisted?" James's voice thundered. "You mean he survived long enough for me to get here?" Evans stepped in, trying to de-escalate. "Mr. Thompson, we're verifying the situation. I believe there's been some misconduct." "Believe?" James said. "Sergeant, my son has bruises on his wrists, blood on his lip, and terror in his eyes. I don't need belief. I need accountability." He turned to Ramirez. "Officer, I'm asking you as a man, not just as a cop. What happened?" Ramirez hesitated, torn. Hayes glared at him. "Don't you say a word!" But it was too late. Ramirez's conscience broke. "They planted evidence," he said quietly. "And they tried to erase the footage." Hayes lunged toward him, but Evans grabbed his arm. "That's enough! Hayes!" The room erupted in chaos. James stepped closer, his voice low and cold. "You think you can break my son and bury the truth? You don't know who you're dealing with." Then, in the middle of the shouting, Evans's phone buzzed, a notification from the cloud system. The body cam footage had just been uploaded automatically, and it showed everything, every word, every lie, every strike, including Hayes's whispered admission. He didn't have anything on him, but they'll believe me over him. James stared at the monitor, his jaw tightening. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of history itself. "This ends tonight." In that instant, Alex's silent recording and the body cam became twin testaments of truth, proof that light could still cut through even the darkest corners of power. And though the night had broken them, it had also begun something far greater, the first spark of justice. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds of Grady Memorial Hospital, painting pale stripes across the white bedsheet where Alex lay. His face was swollen, his lips split, ribs wrapped in gauze, but his eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling as if trying to make sense of how everything had unraveled so fast. Machines beeped softly beside him, steady and mechanical, a cruel contrast to the chaos in his mind. Every sound reminded him of the echoing shouts in the precinct, of Officer Hayes's voice barking orders, of cold metal biting his wrists. When the nurse stepped in to check his vitals, he flinched. Trauma wasn't just in his body, it was under his skin now, pulsing with every beat of his heart. James Thompson stood by the window, still wearing last night's suit. He hadn't slept. His tie hung loose, his eyes red but burning with fury. He had seen many forms of injustice in his life. Courtroom lies, political cover-ups, even his own scars from Selma. But nothing cut him deeper than seeing his son in a hospital bed because of the same hate he'd fought decades ago. His wife, Sarah Mitchell, a federal prosecutor, walked in quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. She set one down beside him. "How is he?" she asked softly. "Physically, he'll heal," James said, voice low. "Emotionally, I don't know," Sarah sighed, glancing at Alex. "The governor called again. He's urging you to keep this contained." James's laugh was bitter. "Contained? They brutalized a child. My child. I'm done containing." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then we go all in. But you know what that means." He did. Political suicide, war with the police union, threats to his office, maybe even his family. But looking at his son, he knew he had no choice. Around noon, Alex stirred. His eyes shifted toward his father, voice hoarse. "Dad?" James turned immediately, gripping his hand. "I'm here, son. They called me a criminal," Alex whispered. "Said I didn't belong." His voice cracked, the words heavy with disbelief. "I did everything you taught me. Dad, I stayed calm. I said, yes, sir. I didn't run." James's heart twisted. "You did everything right," he said firmly. "Everything." Alex blinked away tears. "Then why did it still happen?" James swallowed hard. He didn't have an answer, just a promise. "Because the system's broken, but we're going to fix it." Hours later, reporters began gathering outside the hospital. News of the Attorney General's son being assaulted by Atlanta police was spreading fast, faster than anyone could contain it. The department issued a brief statement about procedural review, but James knew that meant nothing. Inside his office at the Capitol, he watched the raw footage from Alex's phone and the synced body cam file, every slur, every shove, every insult. It was undeniable. It was damning. Yet he also knew the machinery of power wouldn't turn easily against its own. That evening, a new name entered the fight. Elena Marquez, a retired Latina officer and former colleague of Ramirez's father. She had been nearby that night, sitting in her car on Peachtree Avenue, when she saw the confrontation unfold. Out of old habit, she had hit record on her dashboard camera. The footage was clear. Too clear. It showed Alex complying, hands raised, and Hayes shoving him without cause. She'd debated coming forward, but after seeing the news, she couldn't stay silent. She called James's office directly. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice steady but cautious. "I have something you'll want to see, but if I hand it over, my life's about to get complicated." James met her at a diner on the outskirts of the city that same night. She arrived in a gray jacket, her eyes tired but resolute. "I've seen this happen too many times," she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "And every time, they bury it. Not this time." James looked at her. "Why help us?" "Because once upon a time," she said, "I had a son too, and I'd want someone to fight for him." Back at the precinct, Ramirez sat alone in the locker room, staring at his reflection. The weight of what he'd done, or failed to stop, was crushing him. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Keep your mouth shut if you value your career." He deleted it immediately, but the threat hung heavy in his mind. The next morning, Internal Affairs arrived. Chief Patricia Coleman, Atlanta's police chief, tried to calm the storm, but it was already too big. "Do you realize who you arrested?" she demanded during an emergency meeting. "The Attorney General's son. Do you have any idea what you've unleashed?" Hayes leaned back, defiant. "He fit the description. I followed procedure." "Procedure?" she repeated, voice sharp. "Procedure doesn't include assaulting minors and planting evidence?" Hayes scoffed. "That's his word against mine." But it wasn't anymore, and deep down, he knew it. Meanwhile, Alex was discharged from the hospital 2 days later. The drive home was quiet, outside. Atlanta's skyline glittered under the afternoon sun. But to Alex, it looked hollow, like the city had turned its back on him. When they arrived home, Rosa Carter, their longtime housekeeper, hugged him tightly. "Baby, you're safe now," she whispered. But Alex didn't feel safe. He felt exposed. The next morning, he returned to school. The whispers started the moment he stepped through the hallway. "That's the kid from the video," someone muttered. Others stared with pity or skepticism. His best friend Malik tried to lighten the mood, patting his shoulder. "Forget them, man. You're stronger than this. But Alex barely smiled. The viral clips had already spread. Cell phone snippets, shaky footage, news anchors debating whether the officers were justified. Everyone had an opinion, but few knew the truth. During lunch, he sat alone, scrolling through his phone. Comment after comment flooded his screen, some supportive, many hateful. He must have done something. Typical story. Don't play the victim. Each one cut deeper. Later that day, James took him to a therapist who specialized in trauma. Dr. Leona Price, calm and composed, listened patiently as Alex recounted the night. When I close my eyes, he said softly, I still hear him yelling. I keep thinking I'll wake up and it'll start again. She nodded. That's your mind replaying the fear. It's not weakness. It's survival. But with time, you'll learn to make peace with it. That night, James sat in his office, reviewing documents when his phone rang again. It was Elena. You need to see this, she said. They're trying to silence me. I've already had 2 officers at my door. James felt a chill. Stay where you are, he said. I'll send someone. The next morning, his legal team decrypted the flash drive. The footage was crystal clear. Hayes grabbing Alex, Ramirez looking away, the shove, the words. It was undeniable. James called Sarah and Nathan Carter, a civil rights attorney and family friend, to strategize. This isn't just about Alex anymore, Nathan said. It's about every kid who's ever been told they don't belong. That same night, Ramirez showed up unannounced at James's door, eyes weary. I can't live with it anymore, he said. He told me to stay quiet, but I won't. James studied him for a long moment. Then help us tell the truth. Ramirez nodded. I will. When he left, James exhaled for the first time in days. The tide was turning, later that night, as Alex sat on his bed staring at the ceiling. His father entered the room. Son, he said gently, we have the proof. We're going to make this right. Alex looked up, eyes wet but fierce. I don't just want it right for me, he said. I want it right for everyone who never got the chance to fight back. James smiled faintly. Then we'll make sure they hear you. For the first time since that dark night, hope flickered again, small but real, like the first crack of dawn breaking through a storm. The days that followed were anything but peaceful. News outlets across the country had picked up the story. The Attorney General's son wrongfully arrested in Atlanta. Social media exploded, dividing the nation once again. Some called for justice. Others spread lies, saying Alex must have done something wrong or that the story was exaggerated. Every time Alex opened his phone, he felt the weight of judgment pressing down on him. Even some of his classmates began reposting edited clips that twisted the truth. What hurt most wasn't the hate. It was the doubt in the eyes of people he once called friends. Meanwhile, his father's office had become a war zone. James Thompson spent his days balancing legal meetings, press inquiries, and mounting political pressure. The governor called twice, urging him to de-escalate the situation before it gets out of hand. James's answer was quiet but firm. What's out of hand, he said, is the abuse of power. He refused to let fear dictate justice. But fear had already reached their doorstep. Security guards were posted around their home, yet threats kept coming. Phone calls, letters, messages from blocked numbers. One night, someone left a dead bird on their porch with a note that read, "Stop talking, or you'll be next." Sarah Mitchell, both wife and federal prosecutor, tried to stay composed, but the tension was eating away at everyone. Even Rosa, their longtime housekeeper, began sleeping in the guest room to keep an eye on Alex. Across town, Officer Victor Ramirez sat in his car outside the precinct, guilt tearing at him. His wife, 6 months pregnant, had begged him to quit before the job consumed him completely. She didn't know the full truth of that night, but she saw it in his eyes. "Victor," she said softly, "if you don't do what's right, our son will grow up thinking silence makes you safe." Those words haunted him. That night, unable to bear it any longer, he drove to the Attorney General's office. "Mr. Thompson," he said, voice trembling. "I was there. Hayes planted that evidence. He told me to go along. I was scared, but I can't live with it anymore." James studied him for a long time. "You can't undo what happened," he said, "but you can decide what happens next." Ramirez nodded. "Then I'll tell the truth." Before he left, he placed an envelope on James's desk, a collection of internal emails proving a pattern of misconduct and cover-ups within the department. Some were even approved by Chief Patricia Coleman herself. It wasn't just about Alex anymore. It was about an entire system that had gone unchecked for years. The next morning, James called Detective Lisa Brooks and civil rights attorney Nathan Carter. "We have proof," he said. Lisa hesitated. "Sir, if you go public, you'll make enemies in every corner of law enforcement." James looked her in the eye. "Then let them show their faces." At school, Alex tried to return to normal life, but the weight of it followed him. Teachers whispered, students stared, and administrators urged him to stay quiet until things calmed down. But silence was no longer an option. That night, he opened his phone and typed a message that would change everything. "I won't be afraid anymore. I'm organizing a peaceful march at Piedmont Park this Saturday." Within hours, it spread everywhere. By the next day, local stations were covering it, calling it the March for Change. James was asked if he would stop his son from attending. His answer was simple. "If my son has the courage to stand up for justice, the least I can do is stand beside him." Saturday arrived under a soft blue sky. Over 500 people filled Piedmont Park. Students, parents, church leaders, and activists. Homemade signs waved in the wind, and the air carried a rhythm of unity and defiance. Alex stood on a small stage, microphone in hand, his voice shaking but steady. "2 weeks ago, I was just a kid walking home from basketball practice. I wasn't looking for trouble, and I didn't break any laws, but I was treated like I didn't belong. Today, I'm standing here to say this. We all belong. Justice isn't revenge, it's change." The crowd erupted, for the first time. Alex felt the strength of his own voice, but across the street, a smaller group of counter-protesters gathered, shouting insults. Police moved in to create a barrier. The tension was thick. Someone threw a bottle, then another. The scene teetered on chaos. Alex froze, terrified it would turn violent. That's when James stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "We fight with truth, not hate," he shouted. "Don't give them what they want. We rise higher." Slowly, the shouting eased. The moment passed without bloodshed. But that night, the danger came home. Around midnight, a rock shattered the front window. A note was tied around it. Just 5 words. "Stop now, or next time fire." Sarah pulled Alex away from the glass while James stood motionless, staring at the shards glittering on the floor. His fury turned to resolve. The FBI was called in the next morning. Agent Wallace confirmed the threats were linked to extremist groups and possibly off-duty officers trying to intimidate the family. Meanwhile, Detective Brooks uncovered encrypted files that traced back to multiple precinct officials, falsifying reports to protect officers accused of abuse. "We've got enough for a federal case," she said, "but we need to move before they destroy the evidence." James nodded. "Then we move tonight." When the news broke of a police corruption ring connected to Alex's case, Atlanta shook. The police chief resigned within days, replaced by Captain David Lee, who promised full cooperation with investigators. But even as the truth began to surface, the danger deepened. Late one evening, as James worked in his home office, the light suddenly went out. His phone buzzed with a text. "You should have stayed quiet." He looked up, jaw set. The next morning, he held a press conference at the state capitol. "To those who think fear will silence us," he said calmly, "you have chosen the wrong family. The truth will not die in darkness." That night, a video surfaced online, the full dash cam footage recorded by retired officer Elena Marquez. It showed everything: Hayes grabbing Alex, Ramirez standing frozen, the assault, the insults, the arrogance, within hours. It spread across every major network. Public outrage exploded. Protesters filled the streets again, this time not for anger, but for unity. Ramirez came forward publicly, confirming every detail. Hayes tried to deflect blame, even leaking false rumors to the press. But it was too late. The world had seen the truth. Alex watched it unfold from the living room, eyes wet with disbelief. "It's all out there now," he whispered. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "And they can't erase it." In that quiet moment, the fear that once defined them began to fade. Alex understood now that justice wasn't just a courtroom fight. It was a light, one that kept burning no matter how dark the night became. The courthouse in downtown Atlanta buzzed with tension long before the sun rose. Crowds gathered behind barricades, holding handmade signs, their voices echoing through the morning air. Inside, camera crews packed every hallway, reporters whispered updates into microphones, and the sound of heels clicking on marble floors carried a rhythm of anticipation. The trial of Officer Daniel Hayes had officially begun. 16-year-old Alex Thompson sat beside his father at the plaintiff's table, wearing a dark suit that made him look older than his years. His eyes were focused but distant, as if he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. James Thompson, stoic and composed, leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "No matter what happens today, you already won by standing up." Alex nodded faintly, his hands clasped together on the table. Across the room sat Hayes, expression flat, posture rigid, his attorney whispering in his ear. Officer Victor Ramirez sat behind him, restless, guilt weighing on his face like a visible shadow. The room was packed to capacity when the bailiff announced. "All rise." Judge Elaine Carter entered, her presence commanding and calm. She'd presided over civil rights cases before, but this one carried a different weight. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as she struck her gavel once. "Court is now in session." The prosecution opened with measured precision. "This case is not just about an arrest gone wrong," the district attorney began. "It is about a system that failed to see a child as human." She pointed toward Alex. He was a 16-year-old honor student walking home from practice. He followed every instruction. He was polite. He was calm and still. He was beaten, humiliated, and jailed because of the color of his skin. The defense countered immediately, trying to reshape the narrative. Hayes's attorney claimed the officers acted on reasonable suspicion and that Alex had made sudden movements, prompting a split-second decision to ensure safety. But the argument faltered quickly when the recordings began to play. The courtroom went silent as the video filled the large screen, Alex's soft voice saying, "I live right up the street, sir," followed by Hayes's harsh command, "You don't belong here, boy." The gasps were audible. When the shove came, someone in the back of the room whispered, "My God!" The footage showed Alex complying, hands raised, even apologizing. Before being slammed against the car, Hayes's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, realizing the tone of the room had changed. Ramirez covered his face with his hand. James stared at the monitor, expression unreadable but eyes burning with contained fury. when the video ended. The prosecutor spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this was not a misunderstanding. This was an assault. This was abuse of power." She turned toward Hayes. "And today, power must answer to justice." The first witness called was James Thompson himself, as he took the stand. The courtroom quieted completely. His voice was calm, but every word carried decades of history. "When I was 20 years old," he began, "I was beaten by police officers for marching in Selma that night. As I lay in a hospital bed, I told myself my children would never live through that again. But here I am, watching history repeat itself." His voice trembled slightly, then strengthened. "I'm not here as the Attorney General. I'm here as a father, and fathers are supposed to protect their sons, not identify them in hospital rooms." The room fell into heavy silence. Even the judge seemed to pause, letting the weight of his words settle. Next came Ramirez, nervous and pale. He walked to the witness stand and raised his right hand. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do." His eyes flickered toward Alex. "I was there that night," he said quietly, "and I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. Officer Hayes told me to plant evidence in Alex's bag to justify the arrest. I did it. I was wrong." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Hayes's attorney shot up, shouting, "Objection!" But the judge overruled it. Ramirez continued, tears forming. "I can't undo what I did, but I can tell the truth now. The department, we were told to control the narrative, to make sure the public believed the boy resisted. But he didn't." He lowered his head. "He was just walking home." James watched him closely, seeing the pain of a man trying to redeem himself. When Hayes was called to the stand, the energy in the room shifted. He adjusted his tie, trying to appear confident. "I didn't mean for things to go that far," he began. "But we live in dangerous times. I saw someone I didn't recognize in an upscale neighborhood after dark. I had to make a split-second call." The prosecutor stepped closer. "A split-second call to beat a 16-year-old boy?" "He was reaching for his phone," Hayes said. "It could have been a weapon." "And yet," the prosecutor countered, "it was a phone that recorded your every word. Words that include, and I quote, 'You people don't belong here.'" Hayes looked away. "I was under stress," he muttered. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to say it," she interrupted. "Or you didn't mean to get caught saying it." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The tension climaxed when Elena Marquez was called as a surprise witness. The retired Latina officer walked slowly to the stand, her gray hair tied back neatly. "I was parked nearby that night," she said firmly. "I saw the entire thing. The boy did nothing wrong. I recorded it because I knew what would happen if I didn't." She handed over her original footage, unseen until that moment. The screen lit up again. This time, the angle was wider, clearer. It showed Hayes smirking after cuffing Alex, muttering under his breath, "He'll learn next time." The courtroom erupted in outrage. Hayes's face drained of color. The judge called for order, her gavel striking repeatedly. "Quiet in the courtroom!" But the damage was done. The truth was undeniable. When it was Alex's turn to testify, the air grew still. He walked to the stand slowly, shoulders squared, voice soft but steady. "I've been taught to respect the police my whole life," he said. "My dad always told me to stay calm and polite, no matter what, and that's what I did. But it didn't matter. They saw what they wanted to see." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I used to believe that if you just did the right thing, you'd be safe. I don't believe that anymore, but I still believe in justice." He looked directly at Hayes. "Because if I stop believing in that, then you win." The courtroom fell silent again. Even those who had doubted him now looked away, ashamed. After days of testimony, the closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor stood tall. "This case is not just about one boy," she said. "It's about every young person who's ever been told they don't belong. It's about the truth that can't stay buried forever." She turned to the jury. "You've seen the evidence. You've heard the lies. Now it's time to choose who we are as a people." The defense tried one last desperate appeal, but the tide had turned. Outside, protests swelled louder. People waited through the night, praying for justice. The verdict came the next afternoon. The courtroom was packed again, standing room only. The judge unfolded the paper and read aloud, "On the charges of assault, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights, guilty." Hayes's head dropped. Ramirez wept quietly. Alex exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever, his father's hand resting on his shoulder. Reporters rushed out to break the news. The streets of Atlanta erupted with cheers, tears, and songs. In that moment, Alex wasn't just a victim. He was a voice for change. And as he looked up at the courtroom skylight, sunlight breaking through, he knew something powerful. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was possible. The days after the verdict were a blur of headlines, interviews, and exhaustion. Atlanta was still vibrating with the aftershock of the trial. For the first time in years, the city felt divided yet strangely united, split between outrage and relief, between disbelief and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, something had changed. Hayes had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for assault, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations. The courtroom had erupted when the decision was read. Outside, thousands gathered, not in anger this time, but in solidarity. Ramirez, standing before the cameras with shaking hands, confessed publicly to his role, his voice breaking as he apologized to the Thompson family. "I was a coward," he said. "I followed orders instead of my conscience, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right." He was given 3 years of probation, stripped of his badge, and ordered to serve in community programs focused on police reform. Many hated him for what he did, but some saw in him the painful image of a man trying to claw his way back from his own failures. For James Thompson, the victory was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but it came at a cost he could never fully measure. Every morning he woke up. His first instinct was to check the locks, to glance out the window before opening the door. Power had protected his son this time, but power had also endangered him. His office at the state capitol was flooded with messages from citizens, survivors, and even other parents who had lost children to police brutality. Some messages were heartfelt letters of gratitude. Others were threats, angry and venomous, accusing him of turning against the badge. But through it all, James never faltered. He had made a promise. To Alex, to his late wife Maya, and to every parent who couldn't fight back, that he would use his position not for vengeance, but for reform. And so began what the media would soon call Alex's Law. Proposed just a week after the verdict, it was a sweeping reform bill requiring mandatory body cameras for all Georgia officers, along with anti-bias training and independent oversight boards for use of force incidents. It was met with fierce resistance from police unions and politicians who claimed it was anti-law enforcement. But James didn't flinch. He appeared before the legislature with Alex by his side, their presence alone disarming the room. "This isn't about punishing the police," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It's about restoring the public's faith in them. It's about preventing the next child from ending up in a cell for walking home." When Alex spoke, he didn't sound like a teenager anymore. His voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had lived through hell and found purpose on the other side. "I don't hate the police," he said. "I hate what happens when people in power stop seeing others as human. This law is about remembering that we all deserve to be seen." As the bill gained traction, Something unexpected happened. Communities across Georgia began hosting local forums, church gatherings, school discussions, town halls, where people shared their own stories of discrimination and injustice. For many, it was the first time they had ever spoken their pain aloud. And at the center of it all stood Alex, no longer just a victim, but a voice for those who had been silenced. He and his coach, Jamal Harris, launched a youth initiative called the Bridge Project, aimed at mentoring teens who had been affected by police encounters. It offered counseling, legal guidance, and athletic scholarships. Within a month, 8 students had already joined. "We can't change the past," Alex said at the launch event, "but we can build something better for the next generation." Still, the shadow of trauma lingered. Alex suffered nightmares that jolted him awake in the middle of the night. The flashing red and blue lights, the cold sting of metal cuffs, the sound of Hayes's voice. Therapy helped, but the scars ran deep. Sometimes he'd sit alone in the gym after practice, staring at the floor, trying to catch his breath. His father noticed the quiet moments, the faraway look in his son's eyes. One evening, after dinner, he sat beside him on the porch. "You know," James said softly, "when your mother was sick, she told me something I never forgot. She said pain isn't what defines us. What we do with it does." Alex nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to understand that." They sat in silence for a while, the city lights shimmering in the distance, the weight between them heavy but shared. Across town, Ramirez was fulfilling his court-mandated community service at a local youth center. He gave speeches about integrity and accountability, about how easy it was to lose your moral compass in a system that rewarded silence. Some kids heckled him, others ignored him, but a few listened. When a young Latino boy approached him after one of the sessions and said, "My dad's a cop too. I hope he's not like you." Ramirez didn't get angry. He just nodded and said quietly, "I hope so too." He knew redemption wasn't about forgiveness. It was about never hiding from the truth again. Meanwhile, the fallout from the case continued. Chief Patricia Coleman, who had resigned amid scandal, was later indicted for obstruction of justice after internal emails revealed she'd tried to suppress complaints against Hayes. Several officers involved in the cover-up were dismissed, and the department underwent a sweeping internal audit under new leadership. Captain David Lee, now interim chief, implemented new transparency measures, even inviting community leaders to monthly meetings to review police conduct. It was far from perfect, but it was a start. For James, every reform victory felt personal, yet incomplete. He was proud, but weary. "Change," he told Sarah one night, "doesn't come like lightning. It comes like rain, slow, steady, and often unseen." She smiled softly. "Then we'll keep walking in it until it floods. Together." They watched Alex prepare for his upcoming basketball championship, something that had once seemed so trivial compared to the storm they'd endured. But as the crowd gathered at Westlake High that weekend, cheering his name, James realized how vital it was for his son to reclaim normalcy, to feel like a teenager again. Alex scored the winning shot that night. The gym erupted with cheers. For a brief moment, the noise drowned out everything, the headlines, the politics, the fear. When the game ended, his teammates lifted him high, chanting his name from the stands. James watched with tears in his eyes. It wasn't just a game. It was survival. It was healing. It was proof that the world hadn't taken everything from them. Later that week, Alex was invited to speak at a citywide youth summit, standing before hundreds of students. He looked calm, confident, and grown. "I used to think justice was something adults fought for," he said. "Now I know it's something we all have to live for. It's in how we treat each other, how we stand up when it's uncomfortable, how we refuse to give up even when the world tells us to stay quiet." The room fell silent. then erupted in applause. Outside, the Atlanta skyline glowed in the distance, the same city that had broken and rebuilt them. As James drove his son home that night, the radio played softly, a gospel song about light overcoming darkness. He glanced at Alex in the passenger seat, asleep against the window, and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. The journey had scarred them both, but it had also given them purpose, and though the world would move on, the lesson would remain, that justice was not just a verdict, it was a vow, one they intended to keep for the rest of their lives. 2 weeks later, Atlanta's evening sky blazed in gold as the sound of sneakers squeaking against polished wood filled the packed gym of Westlake High. The state championship game was tied, 75-75, with seconds left on the clock. The crowd held its breath as Alex Thompson, the boy the nation had come to know, dribbled toward the hoop. Sweat dripped down his face, but his eyes were calm. He could hear his father's voice echoing in his mind. "Stay focused. Son, finish strong." The ball left his hands in a perfect arc as the buzzer sounded. Swish. The gym erupted in thunderous applause. Students, parents, and even strangers jumped to their feet. For a moment, the noise drowned out everything, the trial, the trauma, the weight of the past 2 weeks. Alex stood still, staring up at the scoreboard that read 78-75, tears welling in his eyes. He had done it, not just for himself, but for every kid who'd ever been told they didn't belong. His teammates rushed to lift him high, chanting his name from the front row. James Thompson clapped, smiling for the first time in what felt like years. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, holding Rosa's hand, while Coach Harris stood tall, proud, and silent, knowing this victory meant more than any trophy. After the game, Alex slipped away from the celebration for a moment of quiet. He stepped into the hallway outside the gym, the muffled cheers fading behind him. He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, and exhaled deeply. For the first time, peace settled over him. Not the fragile kind that could break at any second, but the kind that grows from surviving the storm. He could still see flashes of that night. Hayes's voice, the flashing lights, the cold cuffs, but they no longer owned him. They were just memories now, shadows fading into light. When his father approached, Alex smiled faintly. "You proud of me, Dad?" James placed a hand on his shoulder, eyes soft. "Son, I've always been proud of you. But tonight, you showed the world who you really are." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of victory echoing faintly through the doors. Then James added, "Your mother would have loved this. She'd say you didn't just win a game, you won yourself back." In the weeks that followed, the Thompson family became symbols of hope. Alex's law passed in the Georgia legislature with overwhelming support, mandating body cameras for all law enforcement officers and establishing a state-funded training program focused on racial bias prevention. It was the first legislation of its kind to pass so quickly in Georgia's history, across the nation. Other states began drafting similar bills. Citing Alex's story as their inspiration, news outlets ran headlines like, "From victim to visionary, the teen who sparked reform." But Alex didn't see himself that way. He still attended class, still practiced basketball, still tried to be just a normal teenager. Fame wasn't something he wanted. It was something that found him, despite the attention. He used his voice wisely. When invited to speak at schools and youth centers, he never talked about anger. He talked about courage, about healing, about the power of truth. "What happened to me wasn't fair," he'd tell them. "But what we do with unfair things, that's what defines us." His words carried weight because they came from a place of pain, not pride. Through the Bridge Project, his mentoring program with Coach Harris, he began working with other teens affected by racial profiling, together. They organized basketball camps and discussion circles where kids could talk openly about fear, identity, and resilience. The movement spread faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Ramirez kept his word. He joined a community reform initiative, speaking to police academies about the dangers of prejudice and silence. It wasn't easy. Some officers heckled him, others turned their backs, but he kept going. "If I can stop one officer from becoming the man I was," he said during one talk, "then maybe I can sleep at night again." Even Hayes, now serving time in a medium security prison, wrote a letter to James months later. In it, he admitted his guilt. "I see now what I refused to see before." He wrote, "I destroyed my own soul the moment I stopped seeing your son as human." James never responded, but he folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. A quiet reminder that even the unrepentant could one day face their truth. One warm evening, the Thompsons returned to Piedmont Park, the same place where the protest had taken place weeks earlier. The city had gathered again, this time not in anger, but in unity. Candlelight flickered across hundreds of faces as people sang softly, their voices rising against the Atlanta skyline. Alex stood on the small stage, holding the microphone with calm strength. "I used to think justice was something you waited for," he said, his voice steady. "But I've learned it's something you fight for, every day, in every choice. This isn't the end of my story. It's the beginning of something bigger." The crowd applauded, candles lifting higher. James watched from the side, tears glistening in his eyes. He realized his son had become the man he'd always hoped to be, strong, principled, compassionate. Later, as the night grew quiet, the family stood together overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the distance, the same city that had once tried to break them now standing as a symbol of what they'd overcome. "You ready for what's next?" James asked. Alex nodded. "Yeah, Dad, whatever it is." They didn't need to say more. As the city lights flickered below, the father and son stood shoulder to shoulder, bound by everything they had lost and everything they had reclaimed. The world around them was far from perfect, but for the first time, it felt possible. And in that moment, under the vast Georgia sky, they both understood that true justice doesn't end with a verdict. It begins when ordinary people refuse to stop believing that change is worth fighting for. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in justice and hope.